Cool. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This is great to finally meet you in person because this is how we meet each other in person nowadays through Zoom. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Yeah. So my name is Saloni Doshi. I'm one of the owners, CEO, and chief sustainability geek at Eco and Close. And Eco and Close is what I am passionate about. So Eco and Close is we provide sustainable packaging to D2C brands. We focus a lot on shipping packaging, but we also do retail packaging. And our focus is really to help brands ship in ways that really align with their values. And we're really focused on trying to make packaging as circular and sort of carbon minimal and impact minimal as possible.
Yeah. I think about you guys every time I take all of these boxes to my recycling bin. I'm like,
Exactly.
why do we have all this stuff? Why do we keep doing this? And I mean,
Exactly.
recently I just got something from Amazon the other day, and it was like the box was constructed to the size of the thing. And I thought, well, that's really good. But then you open it and there's like another box, which is exactly the same size and just as well packed. And I'm like,
Where everybody's trying, right?
would
I
you
guess
just wrap it
everybody's
with paper or
trying.
something, right?
Exactly.
So what's the big, I mean, this sounds like an awesome, this sounds like an awesome thing to do. You're really saving things, saving the planet, etc. Like what kind of barriers are there to helping move this thing forward? I mean, I'm sure you're getting pushback from some corners. I mean, I mean, who's saying not to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that there's a couple camps that we fall into. So, God, there's so many people not saying it, but for different reasons. So I would say
Right.
the main pushback that we'll get when we're working, well, I'll say that we have the privilege, I would say, of almost always working with brands that are values aligned. So if brands are talking to us, and we serve 20 to 30,000 brands every year. So we serve a lot of brands, some that are very small, some that are really large enterprise household names. So let's say, one of the larger brands is talking to us. In general, they're very values aligned. They want to save the planet as well. They want to do right by their customers and the business and the earth. And so a couple sort of avenues that we might get pushback. The first is cost, particularly these days as we're entering, I think, the most cost conscious time we've been in for the last 3 or 4 years. And so we're at a time where people are trying to cut costs. And so they're like, okay, I really want to do the right thing, but I have an imperative to cut costs. And so how can I, and unfortunately, we still live in a world where recycled content and designing for recyclability and eliminating all of the harmful toxins from your plastics and things like that, that leads to a more expensive packaging product. And so we're navigating those conversations and trying to meet their budgetary goals while still doing as well as we can by the environment. And then there's a couple other avenues where we actually have like philosophical debates with people. One big one is in the paper world. Like a lot of people just think, oh, if I'm using paper, I'm sustainable. And so they're like, well, I'm already using paper and it's curbside recyclable, so I'm sustainable. And we have to navigate that conversation with them of, hey, listen, if paper is not recycled content, and even worse, if it's not being, so if you don't know where it's being sourced from, it very likely it could be coming from, Canada's boreal forests or, these ancient and endangered forests that we need to preserve from an environmental standpoint. And people don't really understand that just because it's paper doesn't mean it's sustainable. We have to work with them through sort of that philosophy. And then I think the third that's really interesting is there is a really exciting and burgeoning sort of plastic-free movement going on. When we're talking to people in that plastic-free space, they sometimes aren't able, we have a hard time sort of working with them like, hey, we offer both plastic and paper. We focus on maximizing recycled content and recyclability of both of them. And we're working with brands and saying, listen, that's great that you want to move to paper. You need to know that you're probably going to have a higher carbon footprint because paper tends to have a higher carbon footprint than plastic. You're going to have a much higher cost, and you're going to have this sort of logistical burden across the way. So we have to navigate these conversations with them and help them understand the complexity and nuance of these conversations.
Right. It's because immediately people think plastic is bad, paper is good. But
exactly.
I'm sure that it's a little more nuanced.
Exactly.
That, right?
It's more nuanced than that. And we just help people understand the trade-offs and help them make smart decisions, not just gut reaction decisions.
Right. So I'm buying something from Amazon. I get it in a plastic bag or I get it in a paper box. What's more sustainable?
Oh my God, that's the age-old question. Depends on who you ask.
Nobody ever asked you that before in your entire life, right?
We have a lot of literature on our site that's plastic versus paper. So I tend to answer the question of plastic versus paper is, first off, make sure that whatever material you're using have you designed it for recyclability, and have you maximized the amount of recycled content that goes into it? And if you've done both of those things, regardless of your substrate, I would say I applaud your efforts. So that's important. And then in the sort of plastic versus paper, or maybe box versus like sort of thin plastic bag debate, I tend to say, listen, it just depends on your goals. Like if your goal is really focused on, I want to make sure nothing I do is going to end up littering the ocean, and I want to make sure everything that I package in is curbside recyclable, then go with the box. And if you're focused on like, hey, I have a really, a very budget conscious, I don't have a lot of storage space, and I want to minimize my carbon footprint, then I would encourage you to go with the plastic mailer. But again, let's try to do everything we can to make both of those recyclable and made with recycled content.
Right. So there's no rule of thumb which says this is lighter, this is less light, this is plastic, this is paper. There's nothing that I can just glance at it and go, well, this is definitely better than that.
Yeah,
like you really have to dig into
say, if you have a virgin box and a recycled content box, I can almost always say, hey, go with the recycled content box. But when you're starting to compare substrates, you really do have to bring in your budget, your operations, and your value system as it relates to sustainability into that conversation.
Yeah, because I seem to get a little bit of everything from Amazon. Some days I get this massively huge box, with a tiny little object inside of it. And sometimes I get a bag with a larger object. And it's just such a variety. I mean, are they just experimenting? Is that what it is? Or is there some method to the madness?
I think that they are experimenting, but I think they've really put forth this desire to make everything curbside recyclable. But as you well know, because you're probably so when I say curbside recyclable, in general, paper, so corrugated boxes or paper, those, they have those like cushiony mailers that you might get from Amazon. Those are curbside recyclable because they're paper. If you get a bubble mailer or a poly mailer from Amazon or anybody, that's almost always recyclable, but it has to go into a special thin film drop off. So you have to drive to the store. And so it's harder to recycle from like a logistics standpoint. So less people recycle it. And so Amazon has put into place this desire to be curbside recyclable. But as you know, you're probably getting things in poly mailers and bubble mailers all the time. So I have a feeling they're also weighing in cost and operational efficiency, right? Because Amazon, like Walmart, is like, at the end of the day, whatever is the lowest cost possible is going to come first. But they're trying to overlay it with this desire for curbside recyclability.
Yeah. I'm actually not getting anything in bubble at all.
Really?
It's like, it's either free floating in a plastic bag, a very, very light plastic bag, or it's a box, which is, well, sometimes there's those big bubbles, the automated bubble thing that it makes. Although that's pretty rare. Usually I'm getting like, the thing is, box is constructed to the box. So box,
an auto boxer,
basically an auto boxer, whatever.
Yeah.
See, you know all the terms.
I know the lingo.
And then that's cool because you basically take it apart and recycle it immediately, or a bag.
And Amazon has been big on pushing this idea of ships in own container, SIOC. So anybody who's listening who ships on Amazon knows this. And so you're now also more and more likely to get just like the primary package as the shipping package from Amazon, which is sort of interesting and, not a great user experience, but great for the planet, better for the planet, I guess.
Yeah, but I guess the brand is like, oh my God, this thing's going to get all beat up and it's going to have stickers on it and it's going to look like crap. I mean, because from their perspective, it sort of reduces the sort of the unboxing experience. Like, I'm not going to get an iPad. Like, Apple's not going to ship me an iPad with no box.
Exactly.
Interesting. So there's really no. But from your perspective, what's already out there? There are great options that are relatively inexpensive, right? Is there?
Yeah. I mean, I'm biased. So I think we already sell like 200 different packaging solutions, and are they perfect? No. I mean, I don't think anybody's selling anything, and there's no packaging out there that's perfectly sustainable, right? It's still going to have a net negative impact for the planet. What we've really done, I would say, to be ahead of the game and to be as innovative as possible is, again, maximize recycled content, minimize the amount of material that's used. So, Amazon is historically known for shipping the big box when it could have shipped a smaller box because it's operationally efficient. We're focused on like minimize that material, make the box as small as possible, reduce air, make it as thin as possible, and then design for maximum recyclability. So those are the three baselines. And then we focus a lot on innovation as well. So we already offer, 100% recycled shipping boxes that are curbside recyclable, 100% recycled certified poly mailers that are thin film recyclable. We have a very diverse line of that type of packaging, but then we're trying to bring in innovative materials because we know that what we currently have still isn't perfect. So innovations that we brought to market are things like algae ink. So right now, all black ink is made with fossil fuels. And so we brought in an algae ink that's where the pigment is made with algae cells. So it was actually carbon sequestering. That was sort of a nascent idea 5 years ago, and we've commercialized it and brought it to market.
Nice.
There's some other ideas.
Of course, that increases the cost, right?
It's interesting. Algae ink is significantly more expensive than a regular ink. However, ink makes up such a tiny fraction of an actual package. So it does, but it's so minute, you wouldn't notice that cost increase the way you would when you move from 50% recycled to 100% recycled box. That cost differential is more noticeable. And we're also creating papers that are made with agricultural waste instead of virgin tree fiber. So there's a lot we're doing in addition to the products we sell. There's a lot we're doing to try to make the entire landscape of packaging more sustainable longer term. Even though the solutions we're offering today in that space are fairly small and niche, we think in 10 years that might be the answer. So we're working on it.
Well, so it sounds like basically paper and plastic are your two main materials, and there's variations of those materials. Are you looking at anything else like biological or like what other kinds of materials could you possibly use in packaging?
There's a lot of people doing things with mushrooms, which isn't really commercially viable, but sort of interesting. We're doing a little bit in the seaweed and food waste plastic space. So people are converting food waste and seaweed into plastic, which is really interesting. That said, there's another heated debate in the packaging world around, do you design your packaging for recyclability or for compostability? And I sit on the board of like a local composter and recycler, and have known for a long time that though people really think that composting is a really fun outcome for packaging, it's not the right outcome for packaging. We really need to be designing our packaging. Our packaging should be reusable, and if it's not reusable, it should be recyclable. But compostable has become this like greenwashy buzzword, I think, in the packaging landscape. And so things like seaweed and food waste, when you turn that into plastic, today, the only end of life for it is composting. And so we think it's really interesting. It's like, if you can take a waste product and turn it into plastic, that's amazing. Unfortunately, all of those materials have to be composted. And so we're working through what's the right application for materials like that. So we've got our fingers in a lot of like interesting pies in terms of like what material should go into packaging, what material should go into adhesives, into inks, and are sort of playing with then what's the right application given, how we should ultimately dispose of these materials.
Right. But you're right. It's basically modality is get it to the curb, right?
Exactly.
I can't imagine planting it or sticking it in a compost heap. And really, how many people actually compost? It's probably not as common as people believe.
Well,
the compostable product is.
There's nobody compost. I live in Boulder, so everybody composts here. But what actually happened recently?
But you live in Boulder, so that's
the key.
Yes.
And what happened recently in Colorado, and it's happening nationwide, is that industrial composters. So most people don't have their home compost, and they rely on an industrial composter. Any industrial composter that has historically taken packaging is now stopping, because what they're finding is that compostable packaging just is ruining their compost facilities. And so in April, actually this year, our Colorado's industrial composter banned anything except for food waste. And so it's like, that's just another reason why we should not be dumping packaging, even if it's compostable, into the composting stream. Compost is for food waste, it's for organic waste. And so, I think we're course correcting, but for the last several years, there's been a desire to design things for composting because it just felt good,
But so it's like you said, it's a buzzword. But so you're taking this packaging and it's getting recycled, and in the recycling of the packaging, is that effective, or is it still sort of hit and miss?
Yeah, that's a great question. Depends on the material. Most materials that are readily recyclable, so paper, aluminum, PET, which is a type of plastic, and PE, which is another type of plastic. Those are four product or
Isn't that the bad
substrates.
plastic, the PET? And the,
No, PET is a good
oh,
plastic. That's number
okay.
one. And then PE is number two or number four. Those are the most recyclable plastics. Bad plastics are things like PVC, polypropylene. Like if you're like 6, 7, 3, like those are the bad plastics. So what I just named are the quote unquote good plastics. So the good plastics, quote unquote, and then paper and aluminum, those have a really good, robust recycling stream. And what we want to do is get as many of that material type recycled as possible, because actually over the course of the last 3 years, the demand for those materials has outstripped the supply. And so people want more. Like we're only recycling 30 to 35% of our PET bottles. If we could recycle 100%, like there's demand for all of that material. And so we're really trying, what recyclers need to do is get more and more of that product in it. Then things like, there's a lot of things that are hard to recycle, like polypropylene, which is like the berry containers, those clamshell berries, those have more of a struggle to get a market. So even if your recycler accepts it, it might be challenging to recycle. Coffee cups, like a Starbucks coffee cup is another example of a more difficult to recycle thing that you should just try to avoid.
So why is that? Why is the number so low? I mean, people are just throwing it in the trash instead, or is it just behavior change that we need to do?
I think it's behavior change. I mean, so about 60% of paper gets recycled. There's been decades of paper recycling efforts in place. And so we've had a long time to build that base. Aluminum is the same way. Aluminum is so high value at recycling, and it's been around for a long time. So I think plastic is now, we just need to get more education and more incentive to households and businesses to recycle that material. And then we probably have to do some myth busting to help people understand, like, hey, these plastics actually do get readily recycled. So if you have them, put them in your curbside bin, because there's some myths out there that stuff doesn't get recycled. And then we need to train people to avoid all of the bad plastics and not recycle them, because hopefully they won't even use them.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that people do trash plastic, because I recycle all my plastic. Like anything that's plastic, as if it's in LVC. I look at the number and decide whether or not it needs to go in there. And my wife is very conscientious about that. It's like, what's the number? Got to make sure look at it.
You sound like you need to do some training, because more people need to do that.
So we just need, and once we get this stuff, I mean, how much of, I don't really know anything about the industry, but when you look at the plastics that come back through the recycling, I mean, how much of it can you use? Can you reuse all of it, or is some of it
most of it is
or?
in this landscape of, like, and now if we're talking about plastics, the PET and PE, like PET and then polyethylene, which is PE, they get recycled at a fairly high rate. There's a market for it, and they either get recycled back into themselves, or they might get recycled into, so for example, PET bottles oftentimes get recycled into polyester clothing. And so you'll oftentimes be like, oh, this t-shirt was made with 6 water bottles. So that's also a really popular stream. So some of them get recycled into something durable, like a t-shirt, and some of them get re-recycled back into packaging. And so those have good streams. Again, polypropylene, PVC, polystyrene, like styrofoam, those sometimes are quote unquote recyclable, but the application is more limited for how you can actually recycle that material.
Yeah. And I think they're really doing amazing things in the fabric space, because a lot of this plastic clothing that you'd never wear in the past is now great. I mean, it's wrinkle free. They've done all sorts of stuff, and and most of it does come from sort of recycled bottles and things like that.
Exactly.
It's awesome.
Well, definitely a great step forward.
So it's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2033, 10 years from now. Where will you be? Where will the world be? Do you think we'll actually be doing a lot better on that front? I mean, I think I don't see a lot of pushback against this particular, like, I don't see a lot of pushback. I think more people will be recycling. More people will be recycling properly. Plastic will be more properly recycled. But I mean, where do you see us going in 10 years?
Yeah, I am. So I've been accused of being pretty, like, more of a hopeful optimist than is sexy to be
That's
in
okay.
this
Me
industry.
too.
I think most people like to be naysayers. So I'm going to answer in a way that I'm probably people are going to get annoyed at, which is I am hopeful. I think there's been a lot of EPR, which is extended producer responsibility legislation, which is really going to start requiring consumers and brands to focus on circularity. And so if these things go into place, and we're modeling a lot of our legislation after Europe, and I think in 10 years, 50% of our states will have legislation like this. And it's all, as it goes into place, what I think is what my dream, I guess, and I think we're going to start getting closer and closer, is that all packaging is either made from packaging or it was designed to be reusable. And so my vision is that all packaging is having sort of a negligible, if anything, ideally, actually a net positive impact on the planet. So that's called regenerative. So the ideal is that all packaging that's out there is either going to be there forever because it's reusable and we'll just keep reusing it, or it was made from packaging that had been recycled, or it's made from a material that's actually sequestering carbon and making the environment better in its production. And that's our vision for circularity. And I do think a lot of the steps that brands, innovators and legislation like EPR is helping us to get there.
Yeah. So I think what's happening is that you still need packaging. You need packaging coming in and you need packaging going out. It's just the forms are different.
Exactly.
Right. So
exactly.
I need to send something. I still need a package. So I go to the garage and look for a box or a package or something that I can use to send this. Do you see any, like even further, maybe further out, some way we can personally sort of recreate our repurpose and recycle our own plastics?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think everyone's always talking about like drones are going to start delivering there's a lot of automation and interesting technology that will open us up to not having to require the current, like it has to be a box or it has to be a mailer and it has to have a shipping label. So I think as some of this technology opens up our ability to be a lot more creative. An example that I have is we have what we call reusable mailers, where a brand will ship it out and then a consumer will ship that mailer back to the brand to be reused. It really only makes sense right now if you have a business where the customer is going to ship something back to you anyway, like a clothing subscription business,
Right.
Because otherwise you're like paying all this money in shipping. But imagine a world where we were all shipping in reusable mailers, and then every time USPS came to drop off your mail, they were willing to take back all of the reusable mailers that you brought, put them into some hub, and then brands have access to that hub. Like there's a lot of ways that we can, if we can open up the restrictive nature of our packaging requirements today, we can use things like, again, reusable mailers, or innovative, like allowing you to use your waste to ship products, or there's so many things we can do. And I think like we just have to start thinking creatively and open up infrastructure, share infrastructure across brands and across small carriers and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm assuming people have thought through why do we need packaging at all? Like what is the point of packaging, period? It is to protect whatever you're right. And things can be protected in so many different ways. Is that and a lot of times the reason why you're packaging something is because it's going to be roughly transported. But if you could transport it less roughly, then maybe you'd need less packaging. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think right now the global supply chain means that there's a lot of packaging that you as a consumer don't see that we also need to fix, right? The packaging from getting your product from China to the last mile delivery. There's so much packaging there, all the pallet wrap. So these are all things that we're working on, even though consumers don't see them. But at every stage in the way, I mean, it's really well said that the ultimate goal is product protection. And there's so many creative ways to allow for product protection that doesn't require a single use everything all the time.
You're not worried about home 3D printers eliminating the packaging industry because I could just make my t-shirt here, right?
Well, that would be really cool, but somebody's got to probably package and send you the supplies to make your 3D t-shirt, I guess. So
what I want is to take my plastic packaging from the berry containers, shove it into some device that creates like a 3D printing wire, and then that can create my t-shirt. Or
I love it. I saw a YouTube video of somebody taking a waffle maker and putting plastic in it and turning it into like melting it and then turning it into some candle holder. And I thought,
that's cool.
Yeah, there's I mean, it's like that's so niche, but is there a world where there could be more localized recycling? Yes. And I think the EPR legislation is going to encourage that. Where can you localize some of the infrastructure so that it doesn't have to all get recycled from your house, shipped back to like China to get recycled and send something back to you. Like we want to do things in our own states.
Isn't part of the problem that all these plastics need to be recycled differently, right? Because you got this plastic needs this and this plastic needs that. Like if we use the same plastic, could we conceivably have like a universal
Yeah.
recycling device where you just fling it in and it, creates something at the other end, which then you can reuse to 3D print stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think if you could, the problem is that there's no one molecular plastic that's going to work for all your needs, right? If
Right.
you have a water bottle, you need a really different need than a detergent bottle versus like a polypropylene like jar for your berries. So right
Right.
now, I think they would argue like, hey, different plastics have different qualities and heat resistances and thermo capabilities. But I think you're right. If we can consolidate, if we can get rid of all the bad plastics and consolidate and maybe only have 2 or 3, then you start to create a lot more consistency either at home or in a local industrial recycler to be able to recycle properly.
Yeah, because then you could just have it at the corner, right? It's like your neighborhood recycling
Yeah,
bin,
your neighborhood, or at
plastic
least your
recycling.
state. Like every
Yeah.
state should have the capability of recycling their own material. And right now that's not the case.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Seems like-
because, yeah, I mean, they're great questions. And again, that's what I think a lot of the extended producer responsibility and circularity laws are trying to encourage, like in our own backyards. Let's create the infrastructure to be able to recycle and actually turn that recycled product back into something here instead of having to ship it all the way across the country.
Right. Right. Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah,
So
thank you very much for having me.
When someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, well, you can always check out our website. It's ecoenclose.com. And then I'm always open and love to get emails. So my email is Saloni, S as in Sam, ALONI at ecoenclose.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.